this. Okay. That's from Jill. Yep, you're Jill as Sarah Clayton again, from Cumbraen. Welcome. Morning, Lynn. Right, so welcome to the final, but I think probably the key or the most important session of WHQS Unpacked, number 5 here. Hope you've enjoyed the others, those who've been coming to it. I think this one looks now at really what we need to do to get going and things like that. So I'm going to kickstart with the obligatory slides, and then I'm going to introduce Kelly. Kelly's here from the Lloyds Bank Foundation, and she's got a couple of things she wanted to mention as well. So we'll get started if that's okay. Get all the way up. Always takes a second, this, doesn't it? Okay. Give me a minute. Don't worry, we won't be doing all the slides. I've hidden quite a few today. There'll be some extra information for you afterwards, for those who want to study it or go through anything afterwards. I'll just switch that around. I'm hoping you can see a full screen now.
Yeah.
Thumbs up there.
Yeah. Oh,
so
perfect.
Thank you. Welcome to WHQS Unpacked, number 5. By now you should know who I am. I'm David Wilton. I'm a host of these sessions. If anyone wants to get hold of me afterwards, there's my email, or you'll find me on socials and things like that. Going to move on. So I want to introduce Kelly now. I don't know, Kelly, if you want to say hello, and I don't know if I think I can give you the slides yourself, or if not, you might have to say move on. I apologize for that. It's in the settings here.
Shall I just say next slide
Yeah.
when needed? Okay. I'll thank you for the welcome this morning, and I'm really pleased to be here and have the chance just to say a little bit more about the work of Lloyds Bank Foundation, and really just to give a bit more insight into why we've wanted to support these kind of conversations. So I'll just be speaking for a few minutes, and then we'll let the session flow, so we can get the most out of it, really. But for those who aren't aware, my name is Kelly Huxley Roberts, and I work for Lloyds Bank Foundation as Wales Policy and Partnerships Manager. And one of our real priorities is to work on improving housing in Wales as well as in England. So there was quite a good fit in terms of working with TPAS Cymru on this particular series. So as I said, that's one of our priorities. If we can move on the slide, David. But for a bit of bigger context, just to say about our vision and mission, really, the 2 key words to remember for anyone who doesn't know is that we're working towards a more just and compassionate society. So there are 2 key words that drive whatever funding we provide for work, whatever development support, and whatever influencing work we're doing around key issues like housing, for example. So we're really pushing for that just and compassionate society where people who are facing particularly complex issues and barriers have the chance to actually thrive. And local charities, people and communities. And some of these partners, as I said, they're mostly small and local. We do have some exceptions to that, but generally small and very locally rooted is the theme. And the amount of funding we tend to give is an average of around £2.5 million per year. And that covers grants and development support, and that covers all the charities we support across Wales. And we don't just fund housing related work, but that happens to make up around 50% of the work we're funding. And that's because of the complexity of so many social issues and housing being such a mess that it is overall. It's a really challenging and complex situation. So a lot of the charities we support, for example, domestic abuse charities that support young carers, people who have experience of the criminal justice system, for example, refugees, asylum seekers, all kinds of different people from all kinds of different backgrounds, really. But a lot of these that they're helping people in housing actually going through homelessness right now, or who have been and trying to get back kind of to where they want to be. So it ends up being that around half of the charity partners we fund are actually working on housing in some way or another. And we've been doing that for around 40 years. So it's coming up to 40 years next year. And over all that time, because as a funder, we'll have criteria that allow us to kind of make decisions on how to allocate funding fairly. That gives us a big pool of data that we can draw on and to some extent extrapolate a little bit, because we've got a kind of type that we're working with. So that gives us a bit of insight and data, and working with people with direct lived experience and expertise of key issues. That is something we really take seriously, and we're wanting to use that responsibly and encourage people and support people to use the voice more collectively to push for the changes they need to see and deserve to see. So sometimes we work with Lloyds Banking Group to do some of this, not all the time. We are a separate legal entity. So obviously the foundation is funded by the bank, and that's an obvious thing, sharing the brand, but we are a separate legal entity. So sometimes people get confused about that. So I thought that's worth mentioning, but we do work with the bank, particularly on national level, influencing when it comes to Westminster, or sometimes in the Senate as well. But they can open a few doors on occasion. So that is a useful thing. Thanks, David. Next one. Okay, so just briefly, again, for context, our influencing priorities in terms of this just and compassionate society that we're looking to create. You can see on the slide there some of the things that we're pushing for. In the middle, in particular, the 3 green circles show the kind of 3 main issues we're working on. One is to improve support for refugees and asylum seekers. The other is to improve how social security works more generally, and accommodation. And that you can see with the bits of blue in the middle and the bit of yellow in the middle, all of these obviously cross over with each other quite often. But if we're to focus on the accommodation, next slide. The main thing we're looking to do here around housing is to make sure that people facing complex issues have access to suitable accommodation. So the 3 kind of sub objectives under that relate to improving the affordability of accommodation, improving the appropriateness of accommodation, and increasing the availability of accommodation. So we've created a few funding programs to specifically target these issues. For example, if we move on. Sorry, no, I'm wrong, go back. I'll just tell you without a slide, but for example, some of the stuff we've been funding, most people will know of, for example, the Bevan Foundation and Shelter Cymru, and they're doing a lot of work. They've done a lot of work around local housing allowances, one thing that's quite well known, and currently they're doing a lot of work around temporary accommodation, particularly the really bad numbers of children growing up in temporary accommodation. And if there's one thing that's indicative of a systemic issue, it's the fact that children are growing up in temporary accommodation. It's no fault of their own. Like a lot of this kind of housing chat can get quite blaming, can't it, at times? But nobody can claim that a child's done anything whatsoever to deserve that kind of uncertainty and instability in their lives. So that's one example. So we're pushing for a lot of work on that. And then we can move on to the next slide. So obviously with this housing quality standards piece of work, this is brilliant. You know, it's progress into legislating that legal footing that pushes for a bit more equity in terms of the appropriateness of accommodation and what people are to expect, whatever kind of property they're living in. But we'd argue, I think like TPAS Cymru as well, that lived experience needs to kind of the two need to go together, and that's likely where some of these answers will be found, because to define what's appropriate, we need to be listening to people in different kind of situations, and they can say for themselves what is appropriate for them. And it's not my place or anyone's place to kind of really say what that is. It's more about listening to that diversity of voices, I think. So how we're doing that, for example, with the foundation, working with various charity partners, we've contributed to various consultations with the Senedd, working locally with councils and regional partnerships boards, various kind of levels essentially, but trying to always make sure that that lived experience is feeding in to relevant decision making. And yeah, so just a little slide there about, actually we're kind of in this point now, aren't we? Everyone who's here, we're somewhere in the middle, where we've got this legal footing, we've got the socio-economic duty, we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, we've got all this housing stuff going on, and then there's a recognition that lived experience and expertise matters. So hopefully we can work with all of that in a positive direction. I think one more slide. Yeah, so just a few things that some of our partners say, and we fed into various things. I'll just pull out a couple here. So, for example, temporary accommodation needs to be temporary. That's an obvious one. We need more move-on accommodation. People are getting really stuck where they are. Part of that is we need more social housing. We need more choice and security. We need to rebalance the cost of things. So rents should reflect people's actual incomes, including people who are dependent on local housing allowance and other social security. Young people who are particularly trapped often are losing hope and confidence, and we don't know what the impact of that might be longer term. People feeling very stuck for a long time at a young age. And that's not when you need to feel stuck. Well, no one needs to feel stuck, but it's something particularly damaging about that if you think long term. The point about children should not be growing up in temporary accommodation. And then Wales is meant to be a nation of sanctuary, but some people are being put in places that just aren't fit to live in. Then there's thinking about equity, and actually one size doesn't fit all. So there's a few things there, and I won't go on much more, but that's just a little bit of some of the things that people say will go some way to pushing for that. And obviously the implementation is another aspect, but these issues aren't going away unless we do something about it. So I'll stop there and say diolch am wrando. Thank you for listening. That's it.
Thank you, Kelly. We're also working with Kelly then on an output document from this as well. I think it's really important we capture the learnings, the questions, the insights. I'm going to be going back over the recordings and the chats and really to put something together, I think, as part of, to make sure we got some more measurable and outputs out of this. I think that's fair to say, Kelly, isn't it? We're working together on that. So yeah, everyone who's been registered on this program will be receiving that and give a chance to comment on it as well. So let's get into today. We're doing 5 sessions today. Measurement, reporting timescales, acceptable fails. No, in this case, it's conditional passes. That doesn't sound the most interesting, but actually, I think this is at the heart of WHQS, how we're going to improve accommodation. So just a quick reminder, what needs to be done. So there are things we have to do by next March. And I already spoke to a landlord last week who was like, that ain't gonna happen. But that is the requirement, that by next March, there are certain 5 things need to be done. And we're going to do a bit today about the engagement tenants and providing the compliance policy. Compliance policy sounds like that sounds like a bit of a dull document. It is the heart of the strategy. It's a really important document, and we're going to be going into that today. It needs to be published, it needs to be publicly available, it needs to be engaged with tenants on it. It's a great piece of document, and I think it will define WHQS and its success. So they're the sort of things we're going to be looking at today. They're all set on page 36 of WHQS, and it's not that far away. So some of you aware, if you're involved in any of this or writing any of these documents, we're 194 days, working days away from this now, some of these deadlines, and there's a lot to be done. So do not be sitting back on this subject. There's a number of things need to get moving. Just remind you, all the material, all the slides, extra things. There was last time sessions, documents from Canada and Ireland regarding cultural housing and things like this. It's all on that Padlet there for you, and I'll add stuff in within the hour, within 2 hours of today's session. It'll all be there, and as I say, you don't need to log into anything. There's no passwords. There's no magic apps to download. It's just a URL, and you'll be sent that today with all the material. So meeting the standard. We've talked about this in terms of already about home will meet the standard when all the relevant elements are achieved, and all and relevant are going to be the key, because some elements of the standards are not applicable to certain homes, and that not all homes will achieve some of those elements for various reasons. And we're going to talk about that and how that's going to be tracked in the document and tracked by tenants and tracked by Welsh Government. So all the relevant standards need to be achieved when they're relevant. But last time, if you remember, there's this big thing about WHQS, all social housing have met the challenge, have met the standard. Minister talks about a lot of people shout about how well WHQS, but actually 22% were recorded as acceptable fails. There was good reasons in there, very good reasons, but it was still 22%. So, that's 1 in 5 didn't actually make the standard. I say, it's not criticism. There are some bits of it. There's good reason why they failed, but that's something that I think makes or breaks these type of things. It's not about how we get there. It's how many people don't get there and why, if that makes sense. So there are some big challenges. The biggest one, we have an ambitious, I won't bore you what SAP 92 is. We've talked about it before in other sessions, but a very, the top level of energy efficiency, EPCA, just about there. That's one of the challenges. It's not a small challenge. It's a really big challenge to get all housing stock in Wales to be super energy efficient, remove fuel poverty. Great objective. But these heating systems have got to be economical to run. You could put a number of things into this house tomorrow to get it energy efficient, but it wouldn't necessarily be economical to run. And that affordable warmth is what I think we're looking for as a society. We're looking for tenants want. They don't, what solutions, what buttons or what sensors, whatever. Is it affordable? Can we achieve affordable warmth? Those two have got to go together. We also got new requirements, and they're good. I like all the new requirements of WHQS. Flooring, water, that's new green space. Lots of new things in there. They're on top of what we did in WHQS 1 around windows, kitchens. So all these things, and we're going to tight time scales, a lot tighter than they were the first time around, and we're going to need skilled resources that aren't all available at the moment. So some couple of challenges there, a couple of massive challenges, let's be honest about it. And we've got some interesting deadlines. So I've mentioned already the ones for March next year, but then in 2027, the pathways, all that work needs to be started. And by 2034, confirmation all the stock meets the standard. That's not a small thing. So let's look at how we're going to measure this. What's it mean? Understanding the grading system, because that's going to be the heart of it. That's what defines whether people meet it, where the tenant voice is in that, where the tracking is, where the accountability and the transparency. And WHQS has effectively 5 grades. You want everyone at the top in pass eventually. There are going to be some people who in fail at the bottom. And then you've got this grey area in the middle, which we're going to talk about. Not applicable, temporary fails, conditional passes. I'll talk about what they are now. And that's the bit that it's there for a good reason, but it also concerns me. Pass, fail. I hope I don't need to explain what a pass is, a fail. These are individual items on WHQS. So you've got to pass, 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 pass. and it says you don't get a pass till you pass all the items in WHQS. Fail is when you haven't delivered them all. I think that's fairly clear. Let's get into that grey area, because there is a grey area in WHQS between that right and wrong and, oh, it depends. What's that, and that's where there's good reason, but also where the fudging can occur as well. So the first category is not applicable. And not applicable makes total sense, certain elements aren't going to be relevant to every home. WHQS gives examples, page 38, and it says, example is, you don't need an external fire escape for a bungalow. True, you don't need a whole fancy fire escape on a bungalow. So that's not applicable to that home. Water butt, you may not do on a high rise on an individual basis. When we talked about a water butt per property, actually on a big high rise, number of flats there, it's unlikely you're going to do a water butt, so it's a non-applicable. So that's, not a problem. You can't non-applicable the whole property though. No, WHQS very clear. Non-applicable is about individual items. Some of them might not be applicable for that. Yeah, I think that's fairly straightforward. The next one is temporary fail. And temporary fail is where you're unable to do the work for circumstances beyond your control. Classic example, tenant refusal. Whoever did WHQS 1 at Travalis, my Auntie Jean, caused you no end of problems. She refused everything you asked, which was perfectly reasonable. And she was going, no, not having the kitchen, not having the bathroom. She just wouldn't let you through the door. Sorry about that. No, tenant refusal is a big thing. Timing, it might not be the right time for them. So you apply a temporary fail to it. Or it could be, no point putting solar panels on at the moment because the roof's not suitable. We're going to do the roofs in a couple of years' time. Then we can put the solar panels on. So sometimes wider work needs to happen. So you can record that as a temporary fail. You've got to give us reason code. And WHQS, I'm not going to go through reason codes today, but it has a why. Why is it a temporary fail? So that can all be reported and people can see and track and tenants can see where that is. Yep. The only thing about temporary fail is if it is to do with the tenant choice or behaviour or you've got hoard in there, once it's a void or once you're reletting, the work has to be done. But as I say, you can apply for a temporary fail under these two categories. However, temporary fail, the WHQS is quite clear. Certain elements can't have a temporary fail. When it comes to certain safety stuff, carbon monoxide detectors, certain some of the, should we say, the technical things, fire safety, things like that, can't be temporary fail in them. They are statutory requirements and they need to be done. So it's a different option to, well, we're going to redo your kitchen versus certain health and safety things need to happen. So again, it says they're not applicable or a conditional pass will not be accepted for those. And I think that's sensible. We need to protect society. We need to protect the people in living in those properties and their neighbours and community as well. So conditional pass is the one that is a bit interesting. So conditional pass is the third of those greys and acceptable for certain things and physical constraints, heritage. Conditional passes need to be recorded with a reason code. So you're not actually doing the work again this time. You're just saying there's a reason why and it's reasonable. So therefore we want to pass for that. And what could that be? I think it talks about in WHQS a number of things. Physical constraints. So the example I think they use on some of this could be things like, it's just the size or the space sizes of those rooms were built that way, so they don't pass the size, tests of WHQS. Heritage conservation, you can't just start sticking, external wall insulation and cladding on the side of Carnarvon Castle or something if there was some accommodation in there. There is some heritage reasons, cost prohibitive, and there are some things around in the affordable warmth and the net zero stuff around offsetting. It's a complicated subject that I'm not going to do too much on number 4 because that's for the technical people and they know about this. So let's give some examples. This is a garden, not untypical in Wales, a massive steep incline. We've got whole properties stuck on the side of valleys. Now, WHQS says you have to have 10 metre square level garden. What are you going to do about that? You've either got two choices. You've either got to dig it out, and that could be really expensive into a sort of right angle, and that would be cost prohibitive to just do that, to dig it all out. Or physical constraint is another reason, which is if you dug that out, you would end up with a wall, you know, and you could end up with landslides, you could end up with movement, and people falling over, all sorts of stuff. If there was a reason why the geography of that wouldn't work, digging it out and making it level, that would be a physical constraint. So WHQS says is that's not reasonable. Cost or just general geology is not possible to create a level 10 metre square garden there. Conditional pass. Same as well. This is classic bed sit. I was hoping that was a cupboard there, but I think it's actually the shower in that entire bed sit, kitchen, everything there. WHQS says got to have a bath or space for a bath. Ain't going to fit one in there, in that bed sit. Now there is a question: is this suitable social housing? But bed sits still exist. HMOs still exist in social housing, but they would argue that it's a physical constraint category. You can't physically get a bath in there, and therefore it would get a conditional pass. It's an interesting area, that. And also, I said about heritage, things like that. By the way, this is Tylus Town in Rhondda. We're not about to turn that into social housing. It is a much loved community building. I just needed a community building in Wales for the purposes of the slides. But I don't see us slapping a load of external cladding on that, ripping out the windows and putting triple glazed UPVC, things like that. There is heritage reasons why certain buildings will not be able to have certain work. I know, you know, in Welsh, I think we've got the Miners Institute up in Caerphilly, things like that. You know, there's certain planning restrictions on that, and therefore might need a conditional pass. I hope this is making sense. The one that gets a bit grey area though is that it's too costly, and I do worry about this in WHQS. We've got some great objectives, some benefits to tenants, and my worry is that thing of if concern is landlords going, no, conditional pass, let's not do the work, it's too expensive. There is checks and balances in this, but it's one that we need to be collectively tracking. So those think points there, you know, the cost prohibitive, who decides that? Is it landlord by landlord? Will it be in your policy? What happens if new solutions come available after you've given it a conditional pass? That is probably the greyest area, I think, in some of the work we're going to look at today. And that's for tenant groups to work with landlords, tenants, individuals to be challenging. We want to be looking at, there's going to be good reasons for cost. I'm not knocking cross prohibitive. Some properties are just going to be too expensive. But what happens then? Why? Who decides that? Where's the transparency in it? The other thing also is that, you know, does the tenant know if somebody's decided to give them a temporary fail? Does the tenant know someone's conditionally passed their property without doing the work? So not all the work, but parts of it. You know, where does the tenant know? And that was a grey area in WHQS 1. When we asked a lot of questions about that, does the tenant know somebody's temporary failed that property or was given it the criteria of it? So I think tenant voice in this is really important. Also, WHQS does a fair attempt at giving case examples. Example 1, this would be a temporary fail. Example 2, this would be a conditional pass. They give really 5 pages of examples on page 43 to 48. So again, tenant groups being familiar with it, policymakers, people interpreting, even the board level, are they familiar? So when things are getting recorded as not applicable, things like that, does it match the actual examples and the best practice WHQS has set out? And then we're going to talk about think points and tracking this. So I think I mentioned, I may have already sort of hinted at this a couple of times throughout this series. WHQS 1, 22% were recorded as acceptable fails. And that there was good reason for that, not good reason why certain things couldn't be done. Same reasons, heritage cost, tenants not allowing the work, the old anti-gene, not allowing them to get in and do the work. So there were, but was there enough scrutiny of that? Did the tenant know? I don't think that was good enough in WHQS 1, and I want us to do better in WHQS 2. This time it's called a conditional pass, where a lot of those things will be put under, where that grey area is going to be. And there's good grey area and there's bad grey area, if that makes any sense. And I want that scrutiny, I want that tenant's awareness of their property. And that's the biggest concern I think I have. So let's look at how we're going to track this, what we need to be doing. Compliance and certification is all chapter 5 of WHQS. And it starts with a couple of things. So it says data must be submitted at a property level. So there's a whole number of stuff for technical people, including unique property reference numbers and age and type, construction types. They've got to submit individual property data, construction type, number of stories, SAP score, things like this, as part of their tracking to to Welsh Government. And as a minimum, the assessment of each one has got to be completed by March 25. So that, the 198-day deadline. Now, property management software should know a lot of this already, but it's about looking at what Welsh Government are asking for in each one of each property level. That's some of the first data that needs to be provided by March next year. And is it right? Does the tenant agree? I don't think we ever get to that. You couldn't do 15,000, but there is a number of things in there: hazard scores, SAP points, SAP scores, things like that. A lot of things got to be delivered to Welsh Government by March next year. You'd hope a lot of that would be available already. Now, where it gets interesting is social landlords have to develop a compliance policy. And when WHQS was first coming out, I was like, oh, that just sounds like a boring document. It's not. It's not a boring document. It's the heart of this. So it's got to be in place by March next year. And it must be signed off by the board, equivalent for local authorities. You've got your own structures there. And it's got to be published to demonstrate open and transparent working and reviewed annually. So already, tenant participation, publishing this, reviewing it annually, another set of processes, another set of things we need to develop in. So again, and you think, well, it's only a compliance policy. Oh no, there's a whole world in there. I'm not going to go through them all because you probably don't care too much about what it says about database and asset management software. I struggle to care about it either. That's one for people who are into database and asset management software. But there are some key ones here, how you're going to approach WHQS, local resources and things like tenant engagement, verification. I'm going to go through some of the key ones that matter to tenants and tenant-facing staff in a minute now. Some of the others, there's a lot of, you have to have policy about when we demolish versus when would you refurbish, because every time you demolish, you're releasing embedded carbon that's already there. You're creating more carbon waste and things like this. So there's a number of things in that policy you need to be developing community benefits. So there's a lot on that page. Don't worry about it. Some of them are really relevant day to day. Some of them, like I say, database and asset management. That's for people into that. So let's look at some of them. So must set out the landlord's decision making, cost. We want to see in those documents, the decision making. What are you going to decide on? How do you decide cost prohibitive? What is making good? What is the approach for listening to tenants, things like that? So the compliance policy needs to have in there that landlord's decision making, how they're approaching it, how they're making decisions on it. It should also outline how they engage with tenants, tenant groups in meeting and maintaining the standard. That tenant engagement is a key part of this policy. So how they're going to do it, what they're going to do. And also in there, it does talk about elements that are not formally measured that are in WHQS. So if you remember over the series, WHQS has some very measurable objectives. Tick, pass, fail, that type of stuff. It also has some things it wants landlords to track, to think about, but they're not going to be formally scored. Remember some of the green space stuff in gardens. There was about household, some of the disability and older people's requirements in there, biodiversity, broadband, landlords have got to do an assessment on whether there's phone signal there, whether there's broadband available. They don't get marked down if there's not, but they have to report that to Welsh Government. But it's not a tick, pass, fail thing. So how are you going to do that type of stuff as well? They're not formally measured in there. They're not tracked. As I say, for those interested, 6D, 6E, 8B and 8C, I think it was. And then broadband on page 6. So there's a number of things in there that need to be in your strategy that won't necessarily be tracked. The other thing that's interesting, and I think this is a really, again, what makes or breaks WHQS is independent verification. So the compliance policy so by next March, you've got to set out what arrangements are going to be in there for independent verification of compliance, the auditing, the checking. And the initial review has to be within 2 years after the standard starts, and then is undertaken every 2 years. This was something that came in halfway through WHQS 1 as a result of Audit Wales, I think in 2012, I think it was. Now, there's a number of ways WHQS says that. Landlords could audit other landlords. So you could have WHQS experts in one landlord auditing another landlord. Again, as tenants, how comfortable are they? It does make certain sense. You have so many technical auditing and landlords work in a technical area, another. But it's a bit like when you see also, when you have scandals within the police service, police investigating fellow police and things like that from different forces. It creates a little bit of, are you just protecting yourself and things like that. I'm not saying that's true. I know nothing about police investigations. I don't pretend to, but I see the media comments and things like that, and that mistrust, is that the best way? Probably actually quite an efficient way of landlords auditing each other, but that's something that needs to be looked at. It talks about consultants. Now, plenty of consultants in Wales, lots of people hanging off the housing industry. Good on them. But some of those consultants might be technical consultants who are auditing, SAP points and things like that. But are they also the right people to audit on how involved tenants have been, how tenant engagements worked? And I think that's an area we need to look and have more focus on. Are these technical consultants the right people to do your whole audit? Does it need a number of people under an umbrella and under a banner? But it is an important part, independent verification. We have to have trust in it. Can't just have people ticking boxes, self-passing themselves, self-regulating themselves. It's important to have this. So independent verification needs to be in the policy for next March. How are you going to do this? Same, I've dragged on about cost prohibitive activity. But when you use cost prohibitive as a reason, for not doing some work, again, there's codes on it. So you've got to provide under that as well, codes, but also how much did it cost? Why, the reason, how many properties are going to be impacted by this? Certain terraces will not have, I know if you've been upon the Dower and places like that, they're not going to have the 10-meter square level gardens because they're stuck on the side of a hill. So, how many of these, why is it cost prohibitive to level that garden? It's going to be unreasonable, but you've got to justify it and explain it. So again, that's an area we need to be looking at. There's also a compliance statement needed for new tenants. So this is an interesting area because it starts next March. So bear with me on this. A lot of words on this page, but what it's saying is when you relet, you've got a void and your new person moves in from next March, if it doesn't meet the standard on the day they're moving in, which is unlikely, let's be honest, from next March, you've got 10 years, 11 years to do some of this work. So if it doesn't meet the full standard and has been assessed as that on when they're moving in, they've got to be given information about the standard, when their property is going to be met, what it covers, where the home complies, what areas are yet to meet the standard, again with a rationale. I don't know if that exists now, but it exists from March next year. And that's when, so a new person moving in will have a pack about WHQS and these things here. I think there might be another subject, if it's not already planned out, that maybe we could work with CHC or the Welsh local government to, what would be a tenant-friendly approach to this? What would tenants want to see in this? They don't want you know, a yellow page is coming through their door with all this stuff in. It's what do they need to see to comply with the standard, but also is tenant friendly and understandable. So if anyone wants to work on any of that, I think something we could do something together on that. Again, from next March. And community benefit in that strategy, we're just talking about that compliance thing you have to have submitted. It talks about each landlord must set out how community benefits are going to be generated by WHQS. There's a whole load of that we did in session 1 and how to develop that. I've got a lot of thoughts on that. Love to work with people on that community benefits side of it. Again, needs to be in your plan, needs to be in your policy, that's been to the board, that's been consulted with tenants, and has been published by next March. Again, can't hang around on this sort of stuff. Do engage us if you think we can help with that. So just want to remind you from session 1, so I'm going to get some conversation going in a minute. The compliance statement, how are you going to engage with tenants to develop that standard? It says you have to. And I know Vicky Shenton has asked some questions of us. We've gone to Welsh Government and asked them, what does that mean? How are you going to, Welsh Government doesn't like defining that in terms of how you engage, but there is important guidance in there. So on page 6, it talks about at the heart, it's a tenant focused standards. Tenants should be encouraged to take any opportunity for any decisions that affect their community environment. I mean, what's that definition of any? But how do landlords intend to do that? How would tenants like to shape this work? What things? I don't think tenants are going to care what tracking software you're using. You know, it's in the guidelines. I don't care. There's certain things tenants will want to have a say on, certain things. What does any decision mean as well? There's a lot of grey in WHQS. It allows for interpretation, but we want consistency, don't we? That's what tenants want. Consistency, fairness, you know, not one home down the street having different work to others and things like that. What processes need to challenge audit as well and track this from a tenant perspective as well. And what is being published and when. So we need to get moving on this. We need to have these conversations. It talks also on other pages, tenant voice should shape the work as well as it's ongoing. So this isn't just, oh, we better consult with tenants quickly now between now and next March. Actually, as the work goes on, feedback from tenants' experience from retrofits has got to show how that feedback is going to then improve your plans going forward, how you learn as you go along. So how does that work? Do tenants know that feedback is going to be shaping the work? Because if you do, and if tenants really thought you were listening, you might actually get more detail. You might get better insights. Nothing where tenants hate tokenistic feedback forms, tokenistic sessions where you ask them how they're getting on. If people believe that their voice does make a difference, you'll get richer, better insight. So as the work goes on over the next 10 years, what's that feedback loop? It needs to be part of the strategy. How does it shape the work? And do lead tenant groups see that insight? You know, you want your lead tenant groups, your scrutiny panels, your tenant groups you've got. You might even have a WHQS tenant group for this. Are they going to see the insight? Are they going to be able to challenge you back? As a constructive friend in the work that you're doing, it's really healthy. And setting the standards as well. We talked about this in session 1. You don't have to go for the minimum. You know, people like Carmarthenshire, right from the beginning in WHQS 1, set a higher standard. They consult with tenants and they thought flooring's one, you know, where you could get false economies. If you put stuff that isn't suitable or isn't the right quality in, it could end up being taken back out. You may have ticked a box, but you haven't achieved, I don't think, the spirit of it. So this is where tenant involvement, helping develop the standards and interpretation, I think are really important. Again, this is the window now between now and next March to do that. I think there's a number of areas where standards could be better for a longer term gain, longevity of them as well, things like that. So therefore, this is the first thing. We need to be developing skilled tenant groups, and we can help with that. We know a lot about Unpacked. We've been asked to do this now already with a couple of people, which is developing sessions to bring tenants up to speed with what they need to focus on as a tenant group, how they're going to do their role, you know, how be informed in the first place, and then being able to do that scrutiny, do that input, provide that insight into it. So again, I think there's a role for empowering, educating a skilled tenant group. It might be a dedicated WHQS, or it might just be your existing tenant group, but they need that type of thing, and we could help with that if there's anything you want us to do. Equally, I think one of the biggest questions is the individual transparency. You know, what is the pathway for their home? So they're being technically assessed at the moment. There's got to be a pathway for how you're going to decarbonise that individual property. And that's going to be reported on up through Welsh Government. But actually, who's telling the tenant the plan? Who's sharing that? You know, you've got a report on their EPC score next year. But actually, does the tenant know their current EPC score? Does the tenant know if somebody's given it a temporary fail or a conditional pass? I think there's a whole transparency there. And we're looking at portals. We're seeing a lot more, you know, building passports is often the technical name for it, but, you know, information about your electrical certificates, about your gas things, service charges. We're going to need to see more where you can see about your property if you want to. You don't care. You know, got a conditional pass or someone's exempted bits. But I think there's an individual transparency work there that needs to be developed. How tenants are going to know the plan, how are they going to be part of it, how do they know what is being said and reported to up the line to Welsh Government. And therefore, as I said, we're developing sessions, you know, WHQS, the parts tenant groups need to know. One of the ones we've developed recently, you know, quick fire round. We always talk to the landlord and say, how much time can you give? Because you can't do that in an hour. It might be a couple of sessions, it might be it's a half day or something like that. But let's get some of these tenant groups up to speed. Therefore, then you can then engage with them with part of your strategy, or we could support that as well. There's a number of ways in terms of engagement, different things, you know, collaborate, co-design. David Lloyd and I were just with Welsh Government, and that co-design, co-production really is going to be pushed stronger and stronger by Welsh housing going forward. They want tenants to be collaborating and co-creating stuff together, you know, with you, the landlord. It's their homes, and you don't want, you know, if you've got 10,000 homes, you don't want 10,000 Gene Wiltons, you know, you don't want them just fighting you all the way through it, you know, as she did. You know, let's get tenants involved, and it'd be better, it'd be more efficient, and you'll have better success with it. And the other thing also is case studies, explainers. We want to see you making more stuff, explaining WHQS, explaining what's happening. May not be videos, it could be documents, it could be all sorts of stuff, but again, work with us on that. We've got some good ideas on it. You know, this is more net zero type ones, admittedly, but we're always open to also working with people as well. That one we did with Bron Avon, most popular video we made last year. And we make a lot of videos, a lot of them. And people liked seeing what was happening with that retrofit home. Really popular video. So do work with us or do it yourself however you want, but engage people, excite people, explain what's happening to their homes over the next decade. And I think WHQS is key to that. Oh, I think I've got to the end. Right. Now, all the way through, I've been talking a lot. I haven't had a chance to look at any of the chats or the Q&A. In fact, I've lost the Q&A down the bottom for some reason.
David.
Yep.
There aren't any questions in the Q&A, but a few people have made some comments in the chat.
Right, okay.
Around, I don't know if you want to read, but it was just around tenant engagement and how that's going to be reported on, and if it's an actual requirement for landlords to report on the measurements.
Okay. So I'll start at the bottom then, maybe with Lynn. How many new tenants would know what the standard is, given tenant packs? I've moved in a bit late then. I don't know if it is a bit late then, but they definitely, as you said in the slides there, they've got to be given a pack as to where they are, what the plan is for their home and stuff. So that's a new lets. I think that's a useful thing. So when you're moving it now, I think I know what you said. So let's park that for a minute. So I think we need to define what information, how it's tenant friendly, things like that. And again, if there's interest, we could do a follow-up session on that or something to talk about what those packs are, what it means. Are they a bit late? It's an interesting one. I do think that you're still empowering people as they're moving into their property. The bit that I'm pausing on, Lynn, and maybe we agree on this, is I don't think there's enough shown at letting stage when you're bidding on properties, whether that's in the private rental sector or bidding on or applying for properties, on the current energy efficiency, things like that of a property. They're often quite buried in the paperwork or on. I look at some of these social housing portals for different local authorities, and I often think it's not made clear the difference between, because it can mean quite a lot of money difference between an EPC D and a B, say. You know, that it could be £1.5 grand a year difference in cost of running that house on a certain scale of house. And I think that should be much more prominent. So I sort of agree with you that, you know, is it a bit late once they moved in? Oh, the length of time to make repairs and defects once they moved in is a problem. Yeah, I think that's part of what WHQS is trying to do, though, is to set out the plan when and try and give tenants a bit more realistic expectations, but also something to hold the landlord to as to how's this going to work, you know. Sarah Clayton is probably not Sarah Clayton, because we know we've had a number of people log in with her profile. How can a tenant be heard if you don't have formal reporting? I think that's what I'm trying to say, Sarah, is that I think there is a number of things for tenant voice to be heard at tenant group level, that tracking, auditing, doing maybe some of these checks, doing, you know, seeing the tenant feedback. I think tenants need to be the heart of that at a tenant participation level. But I also think there's something about individual tenants as well, knowing your property, knowing how it's going, what your what's been said about your property, what the assessment is.
David, I think the concern is, do Welsh Government require landlords to provide evidence of the tenant engagement?
Yes.
And the tenant monitoring, or is it just is it not actually truly monitored? Do they have to actually provide that evidence? So if things like a tenant is not allowing someone to enter not allowing the landlord to enter the property, they have to provide evidence of that.
Yeah. I don't think so, no. I truthfully, you're into an area I might have to look up truthfully. So if you tick it as, yeah, tenant refused to work. But when it comes to the auditing and checking, you know, I think that's where the evidence would need to be provided. So I do think, no, there is a lot of Welsh Government checking this sort of stuff. So firstly, in the compliance policy, they will be looking at those compliance documents in real detail, how you've engaged, how you've done that type of stuff. The independent assessments as well, the check-in, the auditing every 2 years, should be doing that. If we get the right people doing it, though, like I say, if you have a technical person doing the auditing who's just concerned about SAP points and energy efficiency and things like that, they're not necessarily going to be the best person to audit that tenant voice all the way through. I think it's really important. We look wider than that. So it doesn't have to be formally reported on. Yes, it does. Yeah, no, it does. Maybe I hadn't made that clear. It needs to be part of the compliance policy, and it is part of the reporting. It's not a pass-fail in terms of some of the technical standards, but it is very much, say, part of the strategy and part of the audit process. Sarah again. Is there a Wales WHQS policy group with reps from other local authorities?
I would think that there is, but I think that's a great idea, and I think that there's probably one with CHC for housing associations. But this is a question I can take to Darren from Welsh Government. I've also listed the other questions that have been asked that we've not been able to answer, and then I will email them all over to everybody in this group when I get the answers.
Yeah, that's good. Right, is there, what else have we got here? Oh, sorry. Too expensive has already been used, and unfortunately this is mainly around adaptations. Yeah, adaptations I think isn't part of WHQS, but it is still a very valid social justice and fairness issue. I'm too concerned about it, about too expensive. I think that will be used quite a bit, not straight away. What we noticed about WHQS 1 was people are ticking along, and then as the deadlines got closer, more and more exemptions were put in, acceptable fails, for good reason. Like I say, still couldn't get into Auntie Jean's house, but there was also a big growth of cost effective, it's not cost effective at the last stage to get people over the line. And I do have concerns about it this time as well. There's some really, WHQS 2 is much more ambitious. It's a bigger scale, it's more ambitious than other nations as well. And I think the too expensive will be used quite a bit towards the end to get people compliant. And I think that's why we need to see, what does that mean? Let's have conversations about it, because I've got sympathy for it. There are some properties that are going to be not economical to do. They're not built, they weren't meant to be like that. I think it's an honest.
And we also have a question from Yanto. He's got his hand up.
Okay.
Oh, he just wrote, will tenant opinion requirement be backed by law?
Tenant opinion requirement backed by law. WHQS isn't necessarily a law. Well, it's a standard. So all these things are standards. They're audited by Welsh Government, but it does affect their funding. It does affect their regulatory judgment. It does affect a number of things. So tenant, the minister was quite clear right from the first pages that tenant voice, tenant engagement is key and required in WHQS. It's not none of them are things that can be, taken to law, but they are or can be taken in terms of regulatory feedback, part of the regulatory assessments, your satisfaction levels, the ombudsman. There's a number of places where they could be challenged, WHQS. But none of it is backed, or by law, except the things like the health and safety type ones, the fire safety there, where WHQS has deferred. It said, we're not going to define smoke alarm things. We're going to defer to these standards on damp and mold or fire risk, unfit for human habitation. We'll keep tracking that document, and they are backed by law. Yeah. When I issue a pass set for each individual item of tenants to answer each year, I think there's certain things though tenants wouldn't be qualified to. None of us are. I'm not qualified to check whether that property meets certain fire assessments, certain energy assessments, energy efficiency, things like that. Issue by TPAS rather than the landlord. Yeah, this is something we are thinking about, is the tenant engagement elements of all this and assessments. What could we do in this space? It's not about creating more work, but to assist landlords, to assist tenants, to help bring that understanding together. I think there is something there about, have you been engaged? Are you aware of your property? Did you receive that pack if you were a new tenant? Things like that. I think there's a few things we could develop for this space, yeah. Just to support it, to support and help that tenant voice in this, yeah. So yeah, good point. Is that Yanto? Yeah, thanks. A lot quieter today.
More. Has the Welsh Government already developed a full monitoring return yet?
Yes. So at the back of WHQS, I didn't bring them in because they're quite complicated grids, but they have like all the elements, and it has grids where you can report on failure, conditional pass, tip, pass things. If you've done certain things, that's classed as a failure, but they're quite quite complex things are at the back of WHQS, and that goes back to all the software and things that will be feeding into WHQS. I'd say some of the software is for the technical people to but what monitoring on there, how, you know, transparency of it, I think is one of the questions. You know, and so what is a Welsh mountain bridge? Don't fully understand you there. Not sure what that is. Unless of course is autocorrect. Last slide, bottom right. Quickly look at the last slide, bottom right. Welsh mountain sheep, possibly, is what we were talking about. I mean, there's videos. If the last slide was the videos. Yeah. Yeah, the Welsh mountain sheep are being used to make insulation. Wonderful. Well, I was popular TikTok, I think, of last year. There's a video on YouTube about it as well. And it's been used and tested in a number of places. Yeah. Right, Vicky. Be great to create a simple tick list for tenant engagement that we can all benchmark ourselves. You know, it's not official, so at least the minimum engagement will private. Yeah, I agree. I think Welsh Government were reluctant on this for them to define, because it's about courses, different sizes, different, you know.
But it could be something that's done in collaboration and co-produced with tenants.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So no, I agree. I think that could be something for TPAS to work with a number of people on and do that. I think that was the original intention from the beginning, was, have you done this? Have you got things, you know, go through all the tenant elements of this. How's your plan to publish it? How's your plan to, you know, do feedback on it? Yeah, good. Yep, we're on that, Vicky. I've started some things, but yeah, I think I need August to do that. Yeah. Otherwise, some landlords will tick the boxes. Yeah. And that goes back to who are the right people to challenge this. This is why we need empowered tenant groups as well, you know, that are aware of what needs to happen and can ask those questions, you know. And it goes back to the checking as well, independent verification.
Perhaps if there is that WHQS policy group, that's something that may have already been developed that we're just not aware
most of the
of.
WHQS policy people I've seen, though, are much more developing policies around how they're going to do the energy efficiency, how they're going to do the whole home surveys. They are more technical people, and I think what I'm hearing here, and I think, you know, from Vicky and others, is how do we develop that tenant working group, you know, tenant practice. We did it quite well in Rented Homes Act, if you remember. We've had Facebook area for people to ask questions, share best practice and stuff. I'm not sure if Facebook's the right thing now, but I do think that maybe there's a community of practice for WHQS, and that we can challenge Welsh Government, bring them to account, and ask some of these questions here. It's good.
More questions?
Right.
No, but just to reiterate that we will be developing something, a guide of some sort, based on everything that's happened during these sessions. And you will also receive a feedback form in an email. So please take that time to feedback on this, because we've designed these sessions differently to how we usually deliver sessions. This has been done over the course of 8 weeks, 9 weeks, to give people breaks in between, and whereas sometimes we'll do it a full week of it. So it'd be really interesting to know if you found this setup useful, and if there's anything you think we could do differently. So please take the time to fill that out. It shouldn't take you long.
I very much see this as the start over the next year, rather than
everybody can access. Everyone who's sorry to interrupt you, David. Anybody that's been attending these sessions, regardless of which session it is, will receive all the link to all the information that's on the portal, and the document will be put onto that portal. Yeah,
I think, Lynn, you're right about the, you know, policy groups. That's where I'm concerned about some of the sector ones. Some of the sector ones rightly need technical people to be working together, collaboratively, sharing ideas, sharing best practice. There's a lot of technical stuff in there. Great. Crack on, technical people. Crack on with your software groups and things like that, and how you're going to report into Welsh Government the data and things like that. Fine. But I do think there's something here about the tenant engagement methods and things like that. So suite of documents, checklist,
Yeah, I agree with that suite of documents. It's quite difficult sometimes to access information on the Welsh Government website. If you're trying to find something that's not all in the same area, you've got to go through it all. And it's nice to have a portal of some sort. So, if there are things based on compliance that aren't tenant engagement, we might be able to link something through our portal as well.
Excellent. So
thank you, Vicky.
Yeah, some comments there, really useful. I don't want to keep this session open. I think we had another 7 minutes, but there's no point for the sake of it. What I would say, this is the start. Fill out the forms, engage with us if you think we can help. We'll keep pushing on it. You know where we are. I'd also like to say hello. She's taking herself off screen. Big thank you to Lloyds Bank Foundation, who really helped us, give us the confidence to run these sessions, and by supporting us as well, I think has helped us on this journey. They've really helped us take this forward. So really appreciate it.
And I'd just say, if anybody, after everything that's been said by Kelly from Lloyds Bank Foundation, and you have some ideas about things that might need funding, please do contact her. She left her email address, I think, on the slides. So the slides will be in the portal area.
Yeah, they'll be in there within the half hour, an hour. So
there you go, Kelly.
Yeah.
Shared her.
Thanks very much. Thank you for all these comments. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. But let's keep talking. Let's keep talking. Yeah.
It's a process.
And Kelly's put her email in there as well. Good. We'll put something in the portal as well for anyone who wants to get hold of her. Appreciate it.
Fabulous.
Thanks, everybody. We'll sign off
Thank you all
today.
so much.
Cheers.
Take care. Thanks a lot.